He had never seen his father until a bull changed the family's destiny. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching this video from. Jake Mitchell had been blind since birth. Congenital cataracts, the doctor said, so dense that no light penetrated, so severe that surgery wasn't an option until he was older, if ever. For 4 years, Jake had lived in a world of sounds, smells, textures, and voices. He knew his mother's gentle hands, his grandmother's warm laugh, the purr of the farm machinery. But there was one voice he knew better than any other, one presence that filled his world with safety and love, despite never being able to see the face that belonged to it. His father, Tom. Tom Mitchell ran a cattle property in western Queensland, 3,000 acres of harsh, beautiful country that had been in his family for 4 generations. He'd inherited the land from his father, who'd inherited it from his father before him. A legacy of drought and determination, of good years and bad, of stubbornness and survival. Tom had built his life around that land, had married his childhood sweetheart Sarah, had planned for children who would one day carry on the tradition. When Jake was born blind, it shattered something in Tom, not his love for his son, that only grew stronger, more protective, more fierce, but it shattered his assumptions about the future. How could Jake run a cattle station if he couldn't see? How could he continue the family legacy if he couldn't watch the land, couldn't judge the quality of stock, couldn't do the 1,000 things that required sight? Tom never said any of this aloud, never let Jake hear the fear in his voice, the worry that kept him awake at night. Instead, he poured everything into making sure Jake knew he was loved, that he belonged, that he was worth more than any piece of land or any tradition. Tom carried Jake everywhere, describing what he saw in elaborate detail, creating pictures with words that Jake could build in his mind. "The sky's doing something special today, mate," Tom would say as they sat on the veranda. "It's that kind of gold you only get just before sunset, like someone's painting with liquid copper. And the gum trees, they're almost black against it, their leaves hanging still because there's no wind today, not even a whisper." Jake would listen, his small face tilted upward toward where he imagined the sky was, his mind creating images from his father's words. He knew his father's voice better than anything, the deep rumble of it, the way it softened when he spoke to Jake, the laugh that came from somewhere deep in his chest. But Jake had never seen his father's face, had no idea what color his eyes were, whether his hair was light or dark, whether he was tall or short beyond what Jake could feel when Tom lifted him. And as Jake got older, as he became more aware of the world and his place in it, that gap in his knowledge began to hurt in a way he couldn't articulate. The property's prize-breeding bull, a massive Brahman named Thunder, had been part of the family longer than Jake had been alive. Tom had bought him as a yearling, had raised him carefully, had built his breeding program around Thunder's exceptional genetics. The bull was worth more than $100,000 now. His offspring winning ribbons at shows across Queensland, his lineage improving herds throughout the region. Thunder was also gentle in a way that seemed impossible for an animal that weighed over 900 kilograms. He'd never charged, never showed aggression, allowed Tom to work around him with a trust that most bulls never developed. Tom sometimes wondered if Thunder understood something about the precariousness of life, about the value of gentleness. Jake knew Thunder by sound and smell and feel. The bull's heavy breathing, the way his hooves sounded different from the cow's, the warm, grassy smell of him. Tom would let Jake touch Thunder's side, his small hands exploring the massive bulk of muscle, the coarse hair, the warmth of living flesh. "Thunder's the gentlest giant you'll ever meet," Tom told Jake. "He's big enough to push over a car, strong enough to break through any fence on the property, but he's careful, always careful, like he knows he's got to be gentle with the smaller creatures around him." When Jake was 4, specialists in Brisbane finally said they might be able to help. New surgical techniques, advances in lens replacement, a chance at restoring vision that hadn't existed when Jake was born. It was expensive, risky, with no guarantees of success, but it was a chance. Tom and Sarah sold breeding stock they'd planned to keep, took out a loan against the property, called in favors from family. They scraped together the money for the surgery and the months of follow-up care it would require. It meant hard times ahead, meant selling Thunder to cover costs, meant sacrificing the breeding program Tom had spent 8 years building. The night before, they were supposed to drive to Brisbane for Jake's surgery. Tom sat in Thunder's paddock, his back against the bull's massive side, looking up at the stars that carpeted the Queensland sky. "I'm selling you tomorrow, mate," he said quietly. "Bloke from Rockhampton's buying you for his breeding program. You'll have a good life, better pasture than what I can offer in drought years, more cows to cover, but I'm going to miss you. You've been a good bull, a good friend, really." Thunder shifted slightly, his warmth a comfort in the cooling night air. Tom felt tears on his face. The weight of the decision, the hope and fear about Jake's surgery, the end of dreams he'd held since he was young. The morning of the surgery, Jake was nervous, clinging to Tom as they drove to Brisbane. 6 hours of highway through changing landscape that Tom described in detail to help distract his son. "We're passing through Chinchilla now," he said. "The country's flatter here, not like our hills. Lots of feed crops, irrigation systems making everything green, even though we haven't had rain in months." Jake listened, but Tom could feel the tension in his small body. The unknown ahead, the possibility of sight, but also the possibility of failure. The fear of surgery and hospitals and pain. The surgery took 8 hours. Tom and Sarah sat in the waiting room, time stretching impossibly, every minute an eternity. When the surgeon finally came out, his face was carefully neutral. "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped," he said. "We've removed the cataracts, implanted new lenses, but Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, you need to understand, Jake's brain has never processed visual information. Even if his eyes can now physically see, his brain needs to learn what to do with that information. It could take days, weeks, months, or it might never fully develop. We just don't know." Jake's eyes were bandaged for 2 weeks after the surgery. Time spent in a Brisbane motel room while they waited for the follow-up appointments. Tom sat with his son every day, reading stories, describing the sounds from the street below, being the steady presence Jake needed. When the day finally came to remove the bandages, Tom held Jake's hand so tightly he had to consciously relax his grip. The surgeon carefully unwound the gauze, layer after layer, while Jake sat perfectly still, his other hand gripping Sarah's. "Okay, Jake," the surgeon said gently. "I'm going to remove the final layer. You might see light, shapes, colors, or you might see nothing at first. Whatever happens, don't be frightened. We're right here." The last bandage came away. Jake blinked, his eyes moving but not focusing. The surgeon shone a light, checking pupil response, making notes. "Can you see the light, Jake?" Jake's voice was small, uncertain. "Something. It's bright. It hurts a bit." "That's good. That's very good. Your eyes are responding to light. That's the first step." But over the following days, as they did more tests, tried different exercises, the reality became clear. Jake could perceive light and darkness, could sense movement, but he couldn't see shapes, couldn't distinguish faces, couldn't identify objects. His brain, having never learned to process visual information, was struggling to make sense of what his eyes were now telling it. The surgeon was sympathetic, but realistic. "It might improve with time and therapies," he said, "or this might be as far as we get. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you hoped for." Tom and Sarah drove home to Queensland in silence. Jake sleeping in the back seat, exhausted from the procedures and the disappointment. They'd spent everything they had, sold Thunder, sacrificed the breeding program, and Jake could still barely see. When they arrived home, Tom carried Jake to bed, tucked him in, then walked out to the veranda and sat down heavily. He'd failed to restore his son's sight, failed to maintain the property properly, failed at everything that mattered. Sarah found him there hours later, his face set in lines of pain and defeat. "We'll figure it out," she said quietly. "We always do." But Tom didn't see how. The property was struggling without Thunder's breeding fees, without the stock they'd sold. And Jake was still blind, or nearly so, which meant Tom's dreams of passing the land to his son were still impossible. 3 days after they returned home, Tom was in the machinery shed when he heard a vehicle coming up the drive. He walked out to see a cattle truck backing toward his yards, a familiar-looking Brahman bull visible through the slats. The driver climbed down, consulting his paperwork. "G'day, mate. I'm looking for Tom Mitchell." "That's me. Got a bull here for you. Thunder, according to the papers. The bloke in Rockhampton said to bring him back. Said the sale didn't go through." Tom's mind was blank with confusion. "Didn't go through? I don't understand." The driver shrugged. "Don't know the details, mate. I just move cattle. But the buyer said something about the bull not settling, refusing to eat, acting distressed. Said he couldn't keep an animal that was that unhappy, felt wrong, paid for the transport back himself, said consider the sale void, you'll need to sign here." Tom signed in a daze as Thunder was unloaded into the yards. The bull walked down the ramp and immediately made a sound Tom had never heard him make before. A low, questioning bellow that sounded almost like a call. "Dad?" Jake's voice came from the house. "Dad, is that Thunder? I can hear Thunder." Tom turned to see Jake standing on the veranda, Sarah behind him. The boy's face lit with recognition. "Yeah, mate," Tom called back. "Thunder's home. I don't know how, but he's home." Jake started walking toward the yards, his steps uncertain, using the veranda rail as a guide. Sarah started to follow, to help, but Tom held up his hand. Let him try. They watched as Jake made his way across the yard, one hand outstretched, feeling for obstacles. He knew this property by touch and memory, had learned to navigate it over years. He reached the yard's fence and called out, "Thunder! Thunder! Is that really you?" The bull moved immediately toward Jake's voice, pressing his massive head against the rails. Jake's hands found him, touching the familiar warmth, the texture of his coat, and the boy started crying. "You're back," Jake sobbed. "I thought I'd never touch you again." Tom walked over to the yards, his own eyes wet. He put his hand on Jake's shoulder, and together they stood there, touching Thunder. The three of them reunited in a way Tom couldn't fully explain, but was grateful for beyond words. That night, Tom lay awake thinking. Thunder had refused to stay away, had somehow communicated his distress so clearly that a buyer worth thousands of dollars had voided the sale and paid for transport back. Animals weren't supposed to do that, weren't supposed to show that level of attachment, that level of what could only be described as loyalty or love. The next morning, Tom had an idea. He went to Jake's room and found the boy already awake. "Hey, mate, want to come meet Thunder properly?" "I have met him, Dad. I know Thunder." "Yeah, but I mean really see him. Or try to. We're going to do an experiment." Tom led Jake out to the yards where Thunder was waiting. The morning sun was just coming up, golden light spreading across the paddocks, the kind of light that made everything look magical. "Okay, Jake," Tom said. "Thunder's right in front of you. I want you to look at him. Don't try to focus on details. Just look at the whole shape. Tell me if you see anything." Jake faced the yards, his eyes moving but not settling. Tom watched his son's face, looking for any sign of recognition. "There's something," Jake said slowly. "A shape. It's big. I think I can see where the fence ends and he begins." "That's it." Tom's heart was pounding. "That's Thunder, that big shape. Now I'm going to stand next to him. Tell me if you can see two shapes." Tom climbed into the yards and stood beside Thunder's head. From Jake's position, they should be overlapping, one shape. "I see one shape," Jake said, his brow furrowed with concentration. "A big one." Tom moved away from Thunder, stepping to the side so there would be clear space between them. Now, Jake's face changed. His eyes widened slightly, and he gasped. Two, Dad. I see two shapes. One's thunder, and the other one. Is that you? Tom felt his throat close with emotion. Yeah, mate, that's me. You're smaller than thunder, but still big. And are you moving? Tom waved his arm. Can you see this? Yes, something's moving. Dad, I can see movement. Over the following weeks, Tom spent every spare moment working with Jake, using thunder as the anchor point. The bull was large enough, distinctive enough, that Jake's brain could process the visual information. And once he could see thunder, once that neural pathway was established, other things began to click into place. Tom would stand at different distances from thunder, and Jake would practice distinguishing them as separate objects. They'd move around, and Jake would track the movement. Slowly, painfully slowly, Jake's brain was learning to make sense of what his eyes were seeing. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after thunder returned. Tom was working with Jake in the morning, the light clear and strong. Thunder was in his usual spot, and Tom was standing about 3 meters away. Okay, Jake, tell me what you see. Jake looked, his eyes moving across the space. Then he spoke, his voice filled with wonder. Thunder's brown. He's a brown color. And you're wearing blue, a blue shirt. Tom looked down at his blue work shirt, then back at Jake. You can see colors. I think so. Thunder's brown and white, right? And your shirt is definitely blue. Dad, I can see colors. Sarah came running from the house at Tom's shout of joy. They stood together, crying and laughing, while Jake continued to explore his new ability, pointing at things, naming colors, his world expanding with every moment. The doctors were amazed when Tom brought Jake back for a checkup. The visual development that had seemed impossible was happening, and happening rapidly. They couldn't explain it medically, couldn't point to a procedure or therapy that should have created this result. Sometimes the brain just needs the right trigger, the surgeon said, shaking his head in wonder, something that creates a strong enough neural connection to jumpstart the learning process. I've never seen it happen quite like this, but I'm not complaining. Keep doing whatever you're doing. What they were doing was spending every day with thunder. The bull had become Jake's visual tutor, the constant reference point that allowed him to understand spatial relationships, colors, movements, depth. And as Jake's vision improved, as his world came into focus, the thing he wanted most was to finally, truly see his father's face. Soon, mate, Tom kept saying. Let's make sure you're ready. I want you to really see, not just glimpses. 3 months after Thunder's return, Jake's vision had progressed to the point where he could identify objects, read large letters, navigate unfamiliar spaces with minimal help. The doctors said it was the most remarkable case of late visual development they'd encountered. They wanted to study Jake, to understand how it happened, but Tom was protective of his son's privacy, his newfound ability. On a Saturday morning, Tom decided it was time. He set up a chair in the yard, positioning it so Jake would be looking away from the morning sun, the light ideal for his still developing vision. He asked Sarah to bring Jake out, to have him sit in the chair, but not to tell him why. Jake sat, his hands gripping the chair arms, his expression excited but nervous. Dad, what's happening? You're going to see me, Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. Really see me, for the first time, I want to be the first clear thing you see, because you're the first and most important thing I've ever seen. Tom positioned himself in front of Jake, close enough that his face would fill most of Jake's field of vision, far enough that Jake could focus. Thunder stood nearby, the familiar anchor, the presence that had made all of this possible. Okay, mate, Tom said. Look at me. Look at your dad. Jake's eyes focused, and Tom watched as his son's brain processed what he was seeing. Jake's expression changed, cycling through wonder, recognition, joy, and something deeper that Tom couldn't quite name. You have brown eyes, Jake whispered, like Thunder's but different, and your hair is brown too. but with some grey in it. And you have lines here, around your eyes, and you're crying." Tom was crying, tears running freely down his face as his son saw him for the first time. "You're smiling," Jake said, his own face breaking into a huge smile. "You have a big smile, and your teeth are a bit crooked, and you have a tiny scar right here on your chin, and Dad, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Tom dropped to his knees and pulled Jake into his arms, both of them crying, Sarah crying beside them, and Thunder making that soft sound he made when the people he cared about were experiencing something important. "I always wondered," Jake said into Tom's shoulder, "always wondered what you looked like, and now I know. Now I can see you. And I can see you seeing me," Tom said. "That's the gift I never thought I'd have." Over the following months, Jake's vision continued to improve. He'd never have perfect sight, the doctors said. His visual acuity would always be below normal, and he'd probably need assistance with detailed work. But he could see, could distinguish faces, could watch the sunset, could look at his father and know what he was seeing. The property started to recover too. Word had spread about Thunder's return, about Jake's miraculous visual development, about the bond between bull, boy, and father. People started calling, wanting to breed their cows to Thunder, willing to pay premium fees because of the story, because of what Thunder represented. Tom rebuilt his breeding program, but with a different focus. He wasn't trying to create a legacy for Jake to inherit anymore. He was creating something they could build together, father and son, working side by side in a way Tom had thought would be impossible. Jake proved to be remarkably capable despite his limited vision. He had an intuitive understanding of cattle, could read their behavior in ways that didn't require perfect sight. He could judge quality by movement, by sound, by factors that other stockmen overlooked. "He sees differently than we do," an old-timer said after watching Jake work. "Sees the important things maybe more clearly because he ain't distracted by all the details." 5 years after Thunder's return, Jake was 9 years old and thriving. His vision, while still limited, was functional enough that he attended regular school with minimal accommodations. He excelled at subjects that didn't require detailed visual work and struggled with others, but he was determined and capable in ways that made his teachers shake their heads in admiration. But more importantly, Jake was happy. He helped Tom with the cattle, spent hours with Thunder, and looked at his father's face every single day, still marveling that he could see the man who'd been his entire world for so long. The story of Jake and Thunder had spread beyond Queensland, beyond Australia. International media picked it up, fascinated by the tale of the bull who refused to leave, whose return somehow triggered a blind boy's visual development. Scientists wanted to study Jake. Psychologists wanted to understand the bond. Filmmakers wanted to tell the story. Tom turned most of them down, protective of his son's privacy, worried about exploitation. But when a documentary team approached with a proposal to create an educational piece about animal cognition and the power of bonds between humans and animals, Tom agreed, on the condition that any proceeds would go toward research into pediatric visual development. The filming took 3 months, capturing daily life on the property, interviews with the family, footage of Jake and Thunder together. The director was particularly interested in one aspect, the clear communication between Jake and Thunder, the way they understood each other without words. "It's like they're having a conversation," the director said, watching Jake brush Thunder while the bull stood perfectly still, his eyes half closed in contentment. "The boy talks, and the bull responds with body language, with sounds. It's remarkable." "They saved each other," Tom said simply. "Thunder gave Jake a reason to learn to see, and Jake gave Thunder a reason to come home. Sometimes bonds like that transcend species." The documentary, when it aired, became an international sensation. It wasn't just about a blind boy and a bull. It was about the power of love, the importance of never giving up, the mysterious ways that healing can happen when we open ourselves to unexpected connections. Letters poured in from around the world. Families with blind children asking for advice. Researchers wanting to collaborate. Ranchers sharing their own stories of unexpected bonds with animals. The Mitchells' mailbox was full every day, each letter representing someone whose life had been touched by their story. But the most meaningful letter came from the man in Rockhampton, the buyer who'd returned Thunder. Tom had never properly thanked him, had been too overwhelmed at the time to do more than sign the papers. The letter explained why he'd made that decision. "When I bought Thunder," the man wrote, "I thought I was buying a superior breeding bull, and he is that. But when he arrived at my property, he wouldn't eat, wouldn't settle, spent all day and night calling. I've worked with cattle for 40 years, and I've never seen an animal that distressed. It was clear he needed to go home, that something more important than money or breeding programs was at stake. I didn't understand it then. But after seeing the documentary, after learning about your Jake, I understand now. Thunder knew he was needed, and he was right." Tom read the letter to Jake one evening as they sat on the veranda, Thunder grazing in the paddock below, visible in the golden late afternoon light. "Thunder knew," Jake said softly. "He knew I needed him. Animals know things we don't, Dad. They see things we can't, even those of us who can see with our eyes." Tom looked at his son, at the thoughtful expression on his face, the wisdom that seemed too deep for a 9-year-old. But Jake had lived a life that forced wisdom, had learned profound lessons about dependence and independence, about what truly mattered and what didn't. "You're going to do something important with your life, mate," Tom said. "I don't know what yet, but I know it. You've got a gift for understanding things differently, for seeing what others miss." Jake smiled, that beautiful smile that Tom never got tired of seeing. "I want to work with kids who can't see," he said. "I want to help them learn that blindness doesn't mean you can't have a full life, and that if they do get sight, there are ways to help their brains learn. And I want to work with animals, show people how smart they are, how much they understand." "That's a good dream," Tom said. "We'll make it happen." 10 years later, when Jake was 19, Thunder passed away peacefully in his sleep, having lived to the remarkable age of 17. Jake, now at university studying a combination of animal science and disability services, came home for the funeral. Tom had buried Thunder on the highest point of the property, with a view of the land the bull had helped save. They stood at the grave, Tom, Sarah, and Jake, along with dozens of others whose lives had been touched by Thunder's story. Jake gave a eulogy that left no one unmoved. "Thunder was just a bull," he said, tears streaming down his face, "just an animal doing what animals do. Except he wasn't. He was a teacher, a healer, a bridge between my dark world and the world of light. He refused to abandon me when I needed him most, even though it made no logical sense for him to care, for him to return, for him to be the key that unlocked my vision. I've spent 10 years seeing the world, and every day I've been grateful for that gift. But the greatest gift wasn't the sight itself. It was seeing my father's face, seeing his love for me reflected in his eyes, in his smile, in the tears he cried when I first truly saw him. Thunder gave me that. Thunder changed our family's destiny, and for that I will be grateful every day for the rest of my life." Tom put his arm around Jake's shoulders, his heart so full he thought it might burst. He looked at the grave, at the simple marker that read, "Thunder, the bull who taught a boy to see and a family to hope." "Thank you, mate," Tom said quietly, "for everything." 5 years after Thunder's death, Jake completed his studies and opened a unique therapy center on the family property. It combined animal-assisted therapy with vision rehabilitation, bringing together children with visual impairments and gentle cattle, horses, and other animals. The program, funded by donations and grants inspired by the documentary, served families from across Australia and beyond. Tom, now in his 50s but still strong and capable, helped Jake run the centre. Together they worked with children who faced the same challenges Jake had, showing them that limitations didn't have to be endings, that unexpected solutions could come from the most surprising places. One afternoon, Tom stood watching Jake work with a 6-year-old girl who'd recently received surgery to restore partial vision. Jake was using a new bull, one of Thunder's grandsons, as the focal point for her visual exercises. The girl was learning to distinguish shapes, just as Jake had years before, and the wonder on her face was the same wonder Jake had shown. Sarah came to stand beside Tom, taking his hand. "He's doing exactly what he was meant to do," she said. "Yeah," Tom agreed. "Thunder saw it before we did. That Jake had a purpose, that his blindness and his sight were both part of something bigger." "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Giving up the traditional plan, the idea of Jake just taking over the property like you and your father and grandfather?" Tom thought about it, watching his son work with the little girl, seeing the patience and understanding that came from Jake's own journey. "Not for a second," he said. "I wanted to pass on a legacy, but I was thinking too small. What Jake's doing now, the lives he's touching, the hope he's giving families who thought their children would never have normal lives, that's a bigger legacy than any cattle station." Thunder understood that. He changed our destiny by showing us what really mattered. The little girl squealed with delight as she successfully identified the bull and Jake as separate shapes for the first time. Her parents, watching from the side, were crying. Tom knew those tears, had cried them himself years ago. "Another family changed," Sarah said softly. "Yeah," Tom agreed. "All because a bull loved a boy enough to come home. All because we were willing to see that some things matter more than tradition or plans or expectations." As the sun set over the property, painting the sky in those copper and gold tones that Tom had described to Jake so many years ago, Tom felt a deep sense of peace. The land would continue, passed down eventually to whoever wanted it and could care for it properly. But the real legacy, the one that would outlive all of them, was the lesson Thunder had taught, that love transcends species, that healing can come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the freedom to find their own destiny, even if it's different from the one we planned. Jake had never seen his father for the first 4 years of his life, but a bull named Thunder had changed that, had changed everything, and in doing so had shown a family that destiny wasn't about following a predetermined path. It was about having the courage to recognize when something miraculous was happening and the wisdom to nurture it, no matter how impossible it seemed. Thunder's grave stood on the hill, overlooking the therapy center, the cattle, the land, a monument not just to one remarkable bull, but to the power of connection, the possibility of healing, and the truth that sometimes the most important thing we can see is not with our eyes, but with our hearts. The family's destiny had been changed by a bull, but really, it had been changed by love. And that, Tom thought as he watched Jake help another child take their first steps towards sight, was the most remarkable miracle of all.